Hello and welcome to another edition of Middleware Friday for April 14th, 2017. This is episode 15 and we're going to be talking about Introduction to Azure Function Proxies. So in addition to talking about Azure Function Proxies, we're also going to take a look at our Community Corner, which includes empowering hybrid integration at Channel 9 Studios on the Microsoft campus by Sandro. And then also we're going to talk a little bit about biztalk and how we can use Azure API management to protect our biztalk SOAP endpoints. And this is brought to you by Tord, who is one of the PMs on the Pro integration team. So this episode kind of picks up after our previous episode, which was episode 14, links right here. And what we talked about in that episode was the ability to protect your Azure Function endpoints using Azure API management. And how this was partially facilitated through was the Swagger that is now in preview support for Azure Functions. Now there are some similarities between Azure API management and what we're going to talk about today. And what we're going to talk about today is Azure Functions Proxies, which provides reverse proxy functionality for our Azure Functions. So this episode is largely inspired by a recent blog post by Matthew Henderson of the Microsoft Azure Functions team. And in this blog post, links below, it includes some of the rationale behind why Microsoft decided to roll out this particular feature. And what Matthew's talking about in this blog post is that for some customer, it's been difficult to manage some of the large solutions with a single function app. And there's also a bunch of different organizations that are using Azure Functions in their microservices architecture with deployment between individual components creating some challenges. And in part, it's related to each function app has its own host name. And there can be a lot of different function apps to actually keep track of. And you also may have function apps combined with other APIs. They could be in various regions. So what you end up doing is passing along a lot of that complexity down to your consuming clients or consuming systems. So what Proxies allows you to do is to provide a unified URI that your consuming clients can actually consume. And in the meantime, you're really abstracting all of the various different function apps or other APIs that you may have behind the scenes. So I just want to call out that this is a public preview feature. So mileage may vary. You can expect some changes as this feature actually gets rolled out and moves towards general availability. Here is a solution architecture diagram, fairly similar to the one that we showed last week. The difference being that now we have this Azure Functions proxy sitting here instead of the Azure API management layer. On the back end, we're going to have Azure Functions, and we're going to have Service Bus Queue. Not that it makes a huge difference in here, it's more of an implementation detail, but what we're really talking about is the ability to publish different tag events for power equipment, and we want to actually store them in a Service Bus Queue. And then just to add some variety for this particular solution, we're going to actually add a get scenario where we can actually pull the latest tag read off of a Service Bus Queue as well. So to get started, we need to go ahead and create a function app, and we can simply do so by the Azure portal, and we can go ahead and click New Function. We want to, in this case, create an HTTP trigger for C#, and in addition, we're going to be creating two for this particular scenario. So we want to have one that's called a post tag, which will represent our post if we want to create a tag reading. And in this case, here's the code. It looks pretty much the same as from the last episode. I did leave that other function app in place because I don't want to wreck my API management scenario. So I've gone ahead and created a new function called post tag, and I've essentially got the same code. Then I want to create a second function, and in this case it's going to be called get tag. And I've got some very simple code. No, I'm not using async, so no judgment, but really all I want to do is pull a message off of a queue and then return the last tag value back to the calling client. I'm going to use the same contract that I used in my actual post. Next, what I need to do is I need to be able to get both of the function URLs, and I can get that by clicking on this link. As part of the link, we'll also get the token, the security token that we need for authorization. So go ahead and grab both of those function URLs and put them in Notepad or some other document. And then what we need to do is we need to be able to enable Azure Functions Proxies. And we can go ahead and do that from the function app settings, toggle the on switch, and then we'll see this proxy runtime version latest around .2. Mileage may vary depending upon when you try this. Next, from the function app development pane, we want to go ahead and click on the new proxy button. So now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create my proxy. And when I go ahead and create the proxy, I'm going to be prompted for some different settings. In this case, we're going to start with the proxy get tag. And notice that I've got this consistent URL that's going to exist across both of my proxies. We've got a route template called API/tag, and then we've got a get. Now, as part of the get, we're going to put this backend URL, which is related to my get tag event. Similarly, I'm going to create another proxy for my proxy post tag. Now, this is going to have the same URL, which is very important. We want to provide a unified URL to our consuming client. So this is good. We're going to use the same route template called API/tag. We're only going to be accepting post events. And then what we're going to do is include the backend URL for our post tag function that we previously created. So let's now jump into a very quick demo just to show you the functionality live. So just to ensure there's no tricks up my sleeve, no smoke and mirrors, we're just going to be in Service Bus 360 and we're going to check the state of our queue, which in this case is just called tags. There's no actual messages within this queue at this moment. Next, we're going to jump out to Postman. And first off, we'll go ahead and create a post since we know that there's no messages that are currently in the queue. Let's just mix this up so we know exactly the message that's about to be sent. We're going to go ahead and click send. Note our URI is the URI of our proxy, and it's not the URI of our actual function app for the post tag operation. Let's go ahead and click send. We can see that we've received a 201. It's been created, and we can just see that the tag read's been processed for our tag, which has a tag name of X234. Let's just jump over to Service Bus 360. We'll hit a get, and we'll go take a look at the details. And sure enough, we can see our tag value of 888.32. Let's now pull this message from the queue. And we're going to go ahead, once again, using that same URI, which is really the proxy URI. We're going to go ahead and provide a get request. And now we can see the latest tag is 888.32. We'll just verify that inside of Service Bus 360. And sure enough, we've got no messages in the queue. So that concludes the demo. So what you were able to see very quickly, we could introduce a proxy in front of our different functions and our different operations and actually provide this unified URL that actually could be consumed by our calling consumers. Now, one thing you may have noticed was that there was no auth key as part of our proxy calls. So as I mentioned, this is currently in preview. And I did check in with the product group around this, and they did mention that feature is coming. So something you want to be aware of, as this is a preview service, and be careful about what you are exposing to the public. But that is something that will be addressed in an upcoming release.
I feel you're someone that's not only concerned with what's happening right now, but with your legacy as well. What is the legacy that you're looking to leave behind?
That I changed the world and I have fun doing it.
Moving on to our community content, we've got Empowering Hybrid Integration at Channel 9 by Sandro Pereira. Now, in this blog post, he has a link to a video that he shot back in November during the Microsoft MVP Summit in Building 20. Now, in his short video, he talks about he's got a technical solution that has a lot of different moving parts and highlights a lot of the different Microsoft integration technologies. So he's got Service Bus Queues, he's got BizTalk Server 2013, so this would have R2. He's got BizTalk Server 2013 R2, so this would have been prior to the 2016 release. He's got Logic Apps, he's connecting into CRM Online, he's connecting to on-premise SQL Server. He's also got a file system that mimics another system in his interfaces. So definitely something worth checking out with Sandro. Also, I was there at the same time that he was, and I do have a video here about protecting Logic Apps using Azure API Management as well. Also, we're going to want to check out a video from Tord, who's a program manager on the Microsoft Pro integration team. And within this video, he talks about how to protect your BizTalk WCF web services with Azure API Management. Now, historically, this has been a little bit challenging to do, in part because Azure API Management didn't support SOAP endpoints. Well, now it does. And so this is a great use case where we can actually take a WSDL from BizTalk Server and suck it into Azure API Management. Now, one of the challenges with doing this in the past is that BizTalk Server typically lives on premise behind firewalls and outside of your DMZ. Now, he doesn't get into it. He provides a link to the documentation, but he's actually using Azure API Management Premium Edition or Premium Tier, where he's able to create a VNet between his API Management instance and a BizTalk IaaS deployment inside of Azure. What this really does is it creates a local connection between your BizTalk server and your API Management instance. So this is a great way of modernizing your BizTalk SOAP endpoints, giving it a RESTful entry point, and then actually taking advantage of the various policies that exist inside of API Management. Things like caching, rate limiting, throttling, authentication, some of the additional dashboards and KPIs. So this is really a great better together scenario, and it's definitely worth checking out. That concludes the show for this week. Feel free to leave feedback at the following channels. Next week we will dive into a new topic, and we'll also include some footage from an upcoming marathon that I'm running. I'm actually running the Boston Marathon in Boston, naturally, and so I'm going to include some footage just as some additional bonus content. I want to thank BizTalk 360 for being a great partner of the show, and we'll see you next week.
I've been looking forward to my life changing. Circle getting smaller, I don't like strangers. That has had me on meds as a teenager. Homies morphing on me like the Green Ranger. I was running from something, young and I was coming from nothing. In the last year alone, I got 100 new cousins. I've been hanging with the vultures and swimming with the sharks just to get to the light. I had to go through the dark, yeah. I took my vices and I turned them into strengths. Took my talent and I channeled all my angst. Took for granted all the beauty and the pain, so that's why I take your hatred and return it with a thanks. There ain't shit that you can say to me. I've been living crazily. I ain't slowing down if you listen and pray for me. Wouldn't change a thing, not the struggles or the pain. Cause everything I went through, that's what made me me.